Ooh. No, Jesus! So in this video, we're going to take a look at this massive, misunderstood beast of a sword from the 16th century. It's misunderstood today, and it was even misunderstood in its own time, honestly. This version that I'm using here is not a training sword. It's about 7.5 pounds. It is sharp. It's not exactly the same as your average nylon training sword or even a wooden sword or anything like that. It's a completely different beast altogether. So what do we call this sword anyway? It's got about a bazillion names. The zweihander or two-hander, which is a more modern term. The doppelhander or double-hander. The beiden-hander, the both-hander. The Scholagladiatoria, or a battle sword. I cannot pronounce that. The Iberian form of it is Montante, or the Spanish called it spadone. The Italian called it the spada a due mani. Excuse my accent, I am American. For the sake of ease, I'm just going to call this a greatsword. It's not exactly a term that I like, but I don't really think that any of the terms for the sword are really that good. They're more like a category. There are so many different shapes and sizes that provide different functions, so I'm going to stick to basic terms as far as this video goes. Chances are your first introduction to this weapon was the Black Knight fight scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. The Green Knight is using a version very similar to the one I've been using. And the surprising thing about this fight is, even though the sword is depicted as very slow and sluggish, there is some solid techniques being used here. You can use these with this weapon. And yeah, you can throw it. I wouldn't suggest it, and neither does any fencing manual that exists currently. In Elden Ring and Dark Souls, the sword is seen as very heavy and very slow. And to be perfectly honest, if you were swinging as hard as this guy is swinging, maybe it would dig into the ground like this. I am not a small or weak person, but when I swung it pretty hard for the spin around, it actually took me a few times. Took me off my feet a little bit. I did interpret the combo a little wrong. I should have swung on more of a diagonal. And I found that trying to stop the sword was very stupid. So I ended up turning up the blade for the spin in order to keep the momentum going, which is the best way to use it. I found this combo was a lot easier to do with the nylon, mainly because the crossguard on the nylon sword is much smaller. The thrust shown in the game is not how I would perform a thrust, but it wasn't a very hard one to do. It's not exaggerated too much in the game. The rising cut that follows is nowhere near as difficult as they show in the game. Interestingly, the one-handed combo is pretty much the same exact speed as a two-handed combo in the game. The shape of it, I could have broken my wrist if I would have done this improperly. So how fast is it really? Let's compare it to some other weapons. This is a Chinese Chujian. It's almost as long as a greatsword, but it's half the weight of a smaller longsword. This isn't a super scientific or thorough test, but I just want to give you an idea for how it compares to other weapons. So yeah, as you can expect, it was pretty much the slowest weapon out of all of them in every test. Maybe if people want, we can do more thorough testing in the future, but for now I think that gives you a good estimation for how fast it is. Giacomo de Grassi says that you can defeat a greatsword with a single-handed weapon using great speed, or you can step in and defeat the blow by stopping it where it has little power and grabbing the blade. De Grassi also gives us this useful one-handed thrust with the greatsword, but even that can be displaced by a single-handed weapon like the rapier. And just a disclaimer, my lovely assistant is not in the way, he's offline and not in range of the thrust. Even powerful downward blows from a guard can be stopped with proper form. Even with smaller leaded weapons, you can stop the blow of the sword with proper form. The real power of this sword is when you keep the momentum going. And like that, you can fight many opponents at one time. Ooh.
Push forward.
I would like to test this a little further. Maybe in the future we'll do a whole video with just full contact sparring. And also in those close-up situations you can half-sword with it. This is especially effective against spears in one-on-one fights. But with this stance you can effectively use it as if it was a spear. While in war, it was known to chop the heads off of pikes, supposedly. Some people argue that fact.
That's how it works.
You can actually, with this giant crossguard, catch multiple spears on the crossguard and drive them upwards. Despite what people tell you, swords can beat spears. It's definitely an uphill battle, but it can be done. I've actually demonstrated this before in one of my videos where the sword actually came out on top.
Nice.
And one thing that doesn't really get mentioned too often in these kind of talks is that once you catch the spear, it's pretty much game over.
Ooh, ow!
So you might ask, how good is this weapon? Well, that really matters what you're trying to use it for. Different greatswords have different variations for different purposes. It's like asking what's the better screwdriver, a Phillips head or a flathead? It depends what you're using it for. The Chujian that we showed earlier has the reach of the greatsword and the speed of smaller weapons, but it sacrifices power and defense. The thing about the longsword and the greatsword is that while they might not be the best at any particular thing, they're very good at a lot of different things. They can survive in a lot of situations that other swords couldn't survive in. I don't think I'd want to take the Chujian or the rapier in a battle against a spear. I certainly wouldn't want to take them into heavily armored combat. That's why you have to look at things with more of a nuance. One weapon isn't necessarily better than the other. They have their purposes. The greatsword would eventually fall out of favor to weapons like the rapier, which were more fashionable to wear out in public and easier to carry. If you want to learn more about the greatsword, the history, and their use in warfare, and the martial arts and the masters that were dedicated to them, there are definitely other YouTubers who have done a really good job at that already. I hope I was able to provide some different perspectives that other people haven't covered so far. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know if you want me to make more videos about this subject. Until then, see you next time. But hey, if I had to fight a giant monster in real life, I would not be using some dinky little rapier. Because slaying big monsters will always be cooler with big giant swords. And to be honest, I'd probably swing it just as hard as this guy in Elden Ring.